They are an enigmatic group of warrior monks that were broken up in the early 14th century, and yet, even today in the 21st century, we still look back upon their history and mystery with wonder and speculation. They are linked to the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, and even the bloodline of Jesus Christ. It is said they discovered a great secret buried deep beneath the Temple of Solomon and gathered together in order to protect it from generation to generation. Over time, they were feared by all their enemies, not least of which was eventually the Catholic Church itself. Thousands of books have been written about them, numerous documentaries made, Hollywood movies, computer games and mobile phone apps. And yet, they were in fact just one of dozens of orders of warrior knights. From the Knights of Malta to the Teutonic Knights, there are many stories to be told. Just what is it that draws us to the Knights Templar? What is the truth behind their secrets? In this film, we are going to go deeper and further than anybody has gone before, and we will uncover a secret that is older than the Templars themselves. We will unravel the golden thread of time, the true bloodline, and the ultimate secret they protected, and which became known as the Holy Grail. They were originally called the Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, which thankfully has been shortened to the Knights Templar, or for the really lazy, just Templars. They were a Christian military order recognised by papal bull in 1139. In fact, they were originally founded in 1119 in Jerusalem, and it would be 10 years before they had finally grown in sufficient size to become active in defence of the faith. They eventually became one of the wealthiest and most powerful Christian orders. They grew rapidly through charitable donations, and rich kids flocked to join. Their clever ways with the finance of Christendom aided in both their wealth and power, but also brought a lot of jealousy and resentment. The fighting knights were distinctive and known by all who saw them, from Europe to the various Holy Crusades. The non-warriors, meanwhile, managed vast sums of money and huge tracts of land. They were responsible for creating what we now call banks. They built huge fortifications and castles across Europe and the Holy Land. But their reason for existing was also hugely linked to the Crusades, to take and defend the Holy Land. When eventually the Holy Land was lost to Islam, their reason for existing began to disappear. Soon, royalty were eyeing the Templar wealth and property, and their end was in sight. There spread rumours about a secret and perverted initiation ceremony, and King Philip IV of France decided to take advantage. Philip was deeply in debt and needed money fast. By 1307, he had many Templars residing in France arrested and tortured into giving false testimony against their own. Many were burned at the stake, others fled or joined other orders. By 1312, Pope Clement V officially disbanded the order under pressure from the French king. The suddenness, the secrecy, the once great and powerful order, the tragic demise. All this and more gave rise to legends, and eventually their name became a Masonic decree. Modern Templars arose, games, movies and more. The name Templar is now known across the world. But let us now go back in time to the origin of this once simple brotherhood of so-called poverty and trace their rise to power. By 1099, Christendom had managed to take Jerusalem from the Muslims, following the First Crusade. Now the way was open for Christians to make pilgrimages from Europe to the Holy Land. but danger was everywhere. Jerusalem may have been safe for Christians, but the route to it was not. Marauding bandits were everywhere, and they preyed upon Christians who were often carrying large sums of money as offerings and for basic survival. Thousands lost their lives, and something needed to be done. The man in charge of Jerusalem was King Baldwin II, and by 1119 a French knight by the name of Hughes de petitioned the king to create an order of warrior monks to protect the pilgrims along their journey. Both the king and the Patriarch of Jerusalem agreed to the request, and the newly formed Templars were granted a wing at the royal palace on Temple Mount. The Temple Mount lay directly above the location it was believed that the Temple of Solomon had originally been. This was why they were to become known as the Poor Knights of Christ and the Temple of Solomon. They were originally only 9 in number, and relied upon financial donations to survive. Indeed, their symbol of 2 knights upon 1 horse indicates this poverty. But such poverty was soon ended. They found themselves a powerful ally in St. Bernard of Clairvaux, who himself founded the White Monks of the Cistercian order. Through Bernard, the status of the Templars rose and rose until they were soon officially recognised by the Church. Now they had official status, the money started to roll in, and from across the Christian world. Donations of land and property followed swiftly, and so too did volunteers from wealthy families, who each bought more wealth. In 1139, the Pope himself decreed that the order was exempt from all local laws. This simply meant that they could wander freely through Christendom without paying taxes, and nobody dared to argue, for they carried the seal of the Pope himself. Their power and strength grew, and soon they were the go-to people for any battle. During the Crusades, their might was used to shock the enemy into submission. Their highly trained battle techniques, heavily armed horses, and legend would strike at the heart of the enemy. In turn, the very sight of them charging would have given added impetus to the Christian soldiers behind them. Such was their power and skill that in 1177, at the Battle of Montgisard, 500 Templars and a few thousand infantry defeated Saladin's massed army of 26,000 soldiers. As Bernard of Clairvaux would say, a Templar knight is truly a fearless knight, and secure on every side, for his soul is protected by the armour of faith, just as his body is protected by the armour of steel. He is thus doubly armed, and need fear neither demons nor men. However, most Templars were in fact not warriors. Behind every knight there was an army of support assistants. From the menial to the monetary, there were thousands who administered the huge operation. Each member was sworn to poverty, and yet many were in control of such huge sums of money that whole nations were envious. Because they controlled such wealth, they developed a thing called a letter of credit, a simple note that promised the Templars would reimburse the holder of such a note. This was the origin of the dollar bill or pound note. A person could deposit wealth with a Templar in France, take a note of promise, traverse the Holy Land, and give the note to the Templars in Jerusalem and receive his money. For this, they donated to the Templar cause. This was banking, and may very well have been the very first in existence. But it did work, and now the marauding thieves could no longer steal from people who had nothing. From Europe to the Middle East, the Templars grew in power and wealth. Massive landholdings were donated or bought, and soon they were running farms, vineyards and businesses. They built fortifications, churches and cathedrals. They manufactured, imported and exported, and built their own fleet of ships. Their power was unprecedented. In fact, they had become not just the first international army and bank, but also the first multinational and faceted business. By the middle of the 12th century, the Templars found themselves competing against two other orders, the Knights Hospitallers and the Teutonic Knights. Their political bickering and military scraps, in fact, were weakening Christendom, and with the rise of effective Islamic leaders such as Saladin, things started to get more difficult. As Christian brothers fought each other, Islam moved in and started to take back the Holy Land piece by piece. Soon, the perceptions about Templar power were weakened, and they backed this up with several unsuccessful campaigns against Saladin. By 1244, Jerusalem itself had fallen and would not come under Christian control again until 1917. It was the start of a slippery slope until Friday the 13th, 1307, when eventually the Templars were arrested for heresy and, following confessions, burned at the stake. The remaining Templars were disbanded or joined other orders. The Pope decreed that Templar property should be absorbed into the holdings of the Knights Hospitaller. Many, in fact, see the disbanding of the Templars as simply a merging of the two orders. Many Templar organisations simply changed their names from Knights Templar to Order of Christ. Today, the Catholic Church states that the medieval persecution of the Templars was in fact unjust, that they had in fact done nothing wrong, and that Pope Clement had been pressurised into his actions by the dominance of King Philip of France and the public outcry. But is that the end of the story? We all know that it is not, for the film The Da Vinci Code brought the whole thing back to life. But it was before the film that the secrets had started to emerge. In fact, Dan Brown's tale is simply a fictional expression of several books from decades before that all began to unravel the secrets of the Templars and their link to things much more profound than mere money. It all started a long time before anybody had any ideas about the Knights Templar. It all begins with the myth of the Saviour. Today there is one particular saviour myth that has crept into popular folklore through various best-selling books, documentaries and films. The Merovingian dynasty. The Merovingian dynasty has been romantically depicted by both the regional writers in France and international best-selling authors such as Dan Brown and Bajent Lee and Lincoln. There are tales of mystery and magic, of wisdom and light, and last but not least of all, descent from God himself via his son Jesus and his supposed wife Mary Magdalene. Some even go so far as to say that the Merovingians were descended from an ultra-ancient race of fallen angels that spawned the globe, taking wisdom and knowledge with them as Atlantis sank. It all started with the leader of the Salian Franks, known as Merovech, in the 5th century AD. Both he and his son, Childeric I, were great warriors and fought bravely against the Visigoths, Saxons and Alemanni. Following Childeric came his son Clovis I, who went on to unite most of Gaul and the Loire and defeated the Roman ruler, Siragius, to the joy of almost everybody, or so the propaganda goes. It was Clovis I who adopted the Roman Catholic religion for his nation. Eventually, by the early 7th century, we end up with the infamous Dagobert II, also known as Dragobert, coming from the words dragon and Bert, which in turn comes from Bara or Para, which means pharaoh. So Dragobert or Dagobert simply means king or pharaoh of the dragons. Such links to dragons or winged serpents will become extremely important in our tale. Dagobert is linked strongly by modern authors to the secret of the Holy Grail, a secret so deep that even today it is unclear exactly what it is. Dagobert is said to have visited Ireland, a home of serpent worship, and is also said to have married at Rennes-le-Château, where, incidentally, a ritual skull was found which had a hole in its forehead. Still today, Masons worship the head or skull of Dagobert, calling it Mahomet, much like the head of the Templars were accused of worshipping, called Baphomet. It is kept in the convent of the Black Sisters at Mons. The cup that was formed to hold the skull was made into the shape of a chalice. Hence, we have the head of the dragon pharaoh in the chalice. And we wonder how Dagobert became linked to the Holy Grail. But who is Dagobert and where did he come from? What makes him so important that his skull should be turned into a grail and then eventually worshipped by the Masons, the modern Templars? The year is 469 AD, and the Roman Catholic Church makes a pact with Clovis I, King of the Franks, giving him the title New Constantine as a thank you for becoming Christian. This was the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire, which was hoped to last forever. But it did not, and by the year 800 AD, the empire was threatened. Dagobert II was a French king from the supposed Grail Merovingian bloodline, and was the last of the Merovingian kings to hold the title of Holy Roman Emperor. These Merovingians are said to be a dynasty of Frankish priest kings with magical powers, derived from their long red hair and the special birthmark between their shoulders of a red cross. This symbol would eventually be used by the Templars on their white cloaks. The Christians spread rumours of witchcraft and various other misdemeanours because Dagobert was seen as a threat. After several years spent away from his Frankish kingdom, Dagobert returned from Ireland in 679, but there were problems with the mayors of the palace. 3 years later, the Catholic Church plotted a conspiracy against him due to their displeasure with Dagobert's lack of allegiance to the Roman Church. While on a hunting trip, Dagobert was lanced through the eye by his own godson as part of the ploy. Now power was passed to Charles Martel, beginning the famous Carolingian dynasty. This basically ended the Merovingian bloodline and its run of power. From that day the Merovingian kings were powerless and were officially thought to have died out with Dagobert's grandson, Childeric III. Charles Martel's grandson, Charlemagne, was anointed Holy Roman Emperor. The Catholics had wiped out the troublesome Merovingians once and for all. Or did they? Some still claim today that they are descendants of this special bloodline. However, My researchers have gone to prove that this was pure propaganda, fueled by books such as The Holy Blood and The Holy Grail, and the blatant lies of Pierre Plantard. Thousands of books have sprouted in the last few decades with new evidence, none of which is verifiable and based upon legends only. The Merovingians, born of the sea, with kings connected etymologically with the snake, as well as ritualistically, were simply descendants of a serpent bloodline. The royal line descended from serpent priests seen across the globe in India and China, in Britain and America, and basically everywhere else. Their connections with the Grail are simply via the secret of the snake, and their obvious pagan past brought down the Christian might of Rome. But we shall move into these secrets as we move along. One of the most striking images in Christian history is the Red Cross. Whether a strict Latin or a Templar croix patée, it is a memorable symbol, especially seen as a stark white background. Seen in relation to the Mark of Cain, or the Merovingian birthmark, or even the Templar cross, they all seemingly relate in one way or another to the symbol of the snake. Indeed, the Red Cross is an almost universal symbol of the snake, and therefore to wear it one is branding oneself as a serpent worshipper. The reason for this is quite simple. The serpent and the snake were intertwined. The snake was a symbol of the sun, and the cross a symbol of the seasons. Jesus himself was known to have been involved in this whole serpent worship world. He was equated with the serpent in the wilderness held up by Moses, and he sloughed off his skin in the tomb and was resurrected, just as snakes were seen to do. The Rosicrucians, obviously meaning rose or red cross, were a strange, esoteric secret society of alchemists and spiritualists, linked inexorably to the Masons, Templars and others in the story of the Grail. They have been greatly debated and researched. A term for that small chapel deeply involved in the Da Vinci Code world, Roslin, could very well be Rose Snake or Lynn. Many places involved in the story are associated with this terminology. Whilst there recently filming for a documentary, I found that even the iron fence surrounding the chapel was adorned with the rose and a cross. In the mysteries of Keris and Proserpine, the great secret is communicated to the initiates. The bull has begotten a serpent, and the serpent a bull. The bull is a symbol of the generative force, the power. It is a symbol of the sun in Taurus, and emerges from the sea. As the Quinator, the bull supposedly spawned the Merovingian bloodline, and this son being called Merovec after the sacred bull of Heliopolis, Mero. It was this King Merovec, the first in the line of the Merovingian kings, who was said to have been spawned by the Quinator. This is a giant sea monster with a bull or goat's head. So the Mer of the Merovei becomes obvious in that Mer means sea, born of the sea. The word Quinator, if broken down, resolves into Tor for bull and Quin for king. So he is the king bull of the sea, the sun in Taurus. This bull king goes back a very long way in history, right back to the days of Mesopotamia and kings such as Sargon and Menes. But this goes back yet further to an association between these kings and their legendary genesis from ancient sea-born gods such as Oannes and Dagon, who were serpent gods. The sun, as a serpent, would sink beneath the horizon and become a fish. Dag means fish and On means sun. Dagon is therefore the night-time serpent sun, otherwise known as the Black Sun in various esoteric traditions. The Black Sun is a symbol of the underworld and the unconscious. Could it be that these legendary creatures are archetypes from the unconscious? This is the element Gnostics believed to be the true self, and the early Gnostics were in fact serpent worshippers who had a holy snake Eucharist. They were also the people responsible for writing down the whole Jesus myth and giving us the New Testament we know today. These myths are really about invading serpent worshippers or migrating snake cults, coming into the land, bringing with them all the skills associated with the coming of these ancient gods, such as metallurgy, architecture and medicine, not to mention a distinctive psychology. These deities are half bull, half fish or serpent figures, revealing their belief systems in their strange images, not what they were physically. It reveals a belief system of a duality between the sun and the snake. Oannes is Dagon, and this is related to the word for dragon. This god is the biblical Leviathan, the great serpent of ages past who encircles the world as the Ouroboros, the symbol of immortality and eternity. This is the same symbol which attracts the phrase, "My end is my beginning," like the words placed into the mouth of Christ, "I am the beginning and the end, the Alpha and Omega." In fact, the Christians of later times went on to use the image of the Ouroboros as a symbol for the Alpha and Omega elements of their Christian faith. The Levites, of course, derived their name from this Leviathan, their name meaning the sons of the Leviathan. Oannes is also the same as the Hindu Vishnu, who is linked with the serpent. However, there is another interpretation of equal worth for the Quinator, as we shall see. Heracles wrestled with the snake, which transformed itself into a bull. Heracles tore off one of its horns, which the nymphs tossed into the river, where it turned into the cornucopia, or the horn of plenty. In Scotland, there are hundreds of Pictish symbols found on rocks and ancient Neolithic monuments. There are many that are in the image of the snake, and also with the snake in association with the bull, thus revealing the widespread nature of the bull-serpent association. The Quinator has the root kin, being possibly from Cain, and therefore showing the Quinator to be descended from the serpent race of Cain. Kin is also related to serpent and king. But what is the Quinator? Quin, as we can see, could be from the king. Tor is obviously from Taurus the bull. It could also come from the Babylonian Quinigu, who was the greatest among the children of the dragon goddess Tiamat. According to Babylonian legend, in the beginning there was neither land, gods nor men. There were only elements known as Tiamat and Apsu. Tiamat was the female and the spirit of salt water and primal chaos, and Apsu the male, the spirit of fresh water and void. Tiamat is depicted with scales and a serpentine body and legs, with horns on her head. The union of these two gods produced all the other gods, including the greatest among them, Quinigu. The Quinator was a mythical sea beast, said to be half bull and half fish, or dragon and serpent. This could easily be an indication of Taurus going into Pisces and a message of the stars. However, according to author Crichton Miller, the sign Aries has been deliberately removed or left out of the name in order to claim that their bloodline stretched back to the time of the Age of Taurus. The Quinator is also said to have sired the Merovingian bloodline, as we have seen. The same Merovingians, said by several authors to be descendants of Jesus, the sun deity, and so he is seen as the sun or ruler in each sign. Quinator, traced backwards through Greek and into Phoenician legend, is none other than Zeus, the very same god who impregnated his own daughter with Dionysus. But how is Zeus related to the Quinator? Well, Quinator is Dagon, the half-fish serpent linked with Oannes and Oedicon, and giving us the dragon title. Elsewhere, Dagon is known as Daeonus, and Zeus was Dias. As we know, Zeus was known to have taken the form of the serpent to procreate, just as the Quinator sires a race of sacred kings, and in the Orphic legends it is said the son of Zeus, Dionysus, who was to be the fifth ruler of the world. The Phoenician legend involves him in the disappearance of the daughter of Canaan, Europa. Europa was a princess or the daughter of a god, and was said to be very beautiful. One day, a servant told Europa that a white bull had appeared on a local beach. This tame bull allowed Europa to wrap garlands of flowers around its horns and to climb on for a ride. But the bull ran off with Europa into the sea. She was never seen again. Now we have an entire continent named after a missing girl stolen by a bull. All of this is beginning to sound very strange, and on the face of it, none of this ought to relate. But please stay with it a while, as all will become clear. We must now move into an area that at first glance will also appear unrelated: the Wandering Jew. A myth mainly from the Middle Ages of a Jew said to have lived at the time of Christ and to live forever. Apparently, according to the Christian additions to the myth, he offended Christ on his way to the cross and was therefore cursed to walk the earth alone until the end of time. One of the most interesting things, however, is not the later Middle Age myths, which were attached to the character, but the origin. The Wandering Jew is literally an amalgamation of hundreds of supposedly separate characters, all immortal. However, it is my view that they all originate from the source of serpent immortality. Modern myth comes from a character called Malchus, who strikes Jesus in John 18:20 and gets the curse of immortality. However, in Matthew 16:28 there is also the disciple who Jesus infers immortality upon. There shall be some standing here which shall not taste of death. Note that Jesus, however, says some. There were indeed several characters that Jesus bestowed earthly immortality upon, and not as a curse, but as a gift. There is also one named Semeri, who in the Quran is cursed with immortality by Moses, the wielder of the serpent Caduceus, and not forgetting that Jesus is likened to Moses, who lifted the brazen serpent in the wilderness. There is a remarkable astrotheological reason for this. Jesus was an adept. He could fix time because he understood the motion of the planets and the sun, being a sun deity himself. Fixing the motion is symbolic immortality, for it escapes the cycles of life, nirvana. It is in essence piercing or lancing the dragon, which is the sun passing overhead. The Wandering Jew, therefore, must be somebody who understands this power and has fixed time, albeit symbolically. But there is also more to this character. There are always more levels of understanding, many levels of heaven. The Grotto De La Sebilla, which is said to be in the Umbrian Mountains and was mentioned in a medieval period romance, Mako is mentioned as having been turned into a serpent by an enchantress called Sebilla, who is connected with a healing serpent. This Mako is the Wandering Jew in serpentine form, the same Wandering Jew who sheds his skin. Malchus was also known as Ahasverus or Butterdeus, and in the myth it was as a porter that Ahasverus struck Christ and mocked him for walking slowly. Jesus told him to wait for his return, which of course never happened, and so Ahasverus lives still. Later Christian editions indicate that he repented of his sins and became a Catholic, which is obvious propaganda. However, and what is most extraordinary, he is said to have grown old in the normal way, but when he reaches an age of 100, he sheds his skin and rejuvenates to the age of 30. What can be more like the tale of the rejuvenating snake? And to the sacred age of 30, which is the age of illumination, and the same as the degrees between each and every zodiacal sign. The Wandering Jew is likened to Cain, the father of the serpent race, whom, it is said, wanders the earth as an immortal. As the Lord put a mark upon him so that none would hurt him, the same mark that the Merovingians carried and would later adorn the robes of the Knights Templar, a blood-red cross. There is also an amazing legend about the linking of Hern, or Canunus, the horned god, with the Wandering Jew, in that they are one and the same. It is said that Hern told Jesus to drink water from the indent of a horse's hoof, telling Jesus therefore to subjugate himself to the old ways. From Pashupati to Pan, the horned god is seen throughout history in connection with the secret of the serpent. It is Pan who kicks open the cister of the Bacchus, revealing the serpent from within. Dionysius, or Bacchus, is often depicted with horns, and the Bacchanals of Thrace were said to wear the horns in imitation of their god. Even Zeus, who transformed himself into a serpent to bring Dionysus back to life, was often depicted as having horns. The horns are thought to signify the solar aspect of the god, the life-giving aspect. They were also symbolic of the bull, which is again a solar symbol, or the sun in Taurus. The goat is also associated in terms of animals and horns with the serpent, as Dionysus is often manifested as a goat. Indeed, the awakening of Moses is symbolised by horns, or shining forth. This, the same Moses who wields the caduceus staff and raises the brazen serpent of healing for Yahweh in the wilderness, a point not lost on 1st century AD medallions which show Jehovah as a serpent. The horns then emerge as the enlightenment aspect of the serpent, the shining or illumination one gains from the process known as Kundalini, or similar methods. They are the symbolic representation of what occurs inside the head. Heads are central to the story of the serpent cults, and there are many instances which prove this point. Hydra was the Greek water dragon, said by Alcaeus to have 9 heads, one of which was immortal. Apollodorus tells us, for his second labour, Heracles was instructed to slay the Lernaean Hydra. The beast was nurtured in the marshes of Lerna, from where she would go out into the flatland to raid flocks and ruin the land. The Hydra was of enormous size, with 8 mortal heads and a 9th one in the middle that was mortal. Note that the Templars began with 9 knights. 9 is incredibly important, and is actually the Pleiades in the sky. Apollodorus tells us that Heracles lopped off the immortal head, which he buried and covered with a heavy boulder at the side of the road that runs through Lerna to Elaeus. He cut up the Hydra's body and dipped his arrows in its venom. Strabo gives an even more telling tale of the usefulness of this poison, as he points out that the Anigros River of Elis emits an offensive odour for a distance of 20 stadia and makes the fish unfit to eat. This is attributed by some writers to the fact that certain of the Centauri here washed off the poison they got from the Hydra. The bathing water from here cures leprosy, elephantiasis and scabies. A strange effect for poison to have, that it should, diluted in the waters of the river, have medicinal benefit. It has to be related to the equally peculiar concept that the Hydra has one immortal head. This, of course, relates to my discovery that our ancestors used venom and blood of the snake as a unique medicinal substance or elixir. Could this be a clue to the dilution ratio of venom to blood, an 8-to-1 ratio? According to the Argonautia, the arrows dipped in the blood of the Hydra were used to kill the dragon of Hesperides, which lay by the trunk of the apple tree. There is another hint that maybe the diluted poison should be mixed with the horse. Heracles shot his poisonous arrows into Nessus. As he died, Nessus, knowing how poisonous the arrows were, since they had been dipped in the gall of the Lernaean Hydra, drew out some of his blood and gave it to Genedra, telling her it was a love charm. If she wanted her husband not to desert her, she should have his garments smeared with his blood. This is not obviously linked with the horse at all until we discover that Nessus was a centaur and therefore half horse, half man, like Chiron, the teacher of the snake god Aesculapius. Let's just sideline a moment and look at the horse. The etymology of the horse is strangely linked with the snake, and it is an amazing trip through the mythologies of the world to discover the secret of this association. The word nag is now synonymous with the horse, but it comes from the Middle English naga, which itself is a derivation of the word snag, snagger, or snecker, which is snake. This relates strongly back again to India, where the word used for snake was naga. Here, alone in language, we have this peculiar mixing between the snake and the horse, which has occurred over a vast period of time, and yet is still observable today. The horse, without doubt, is not only linked with the serpent, but also the sun, as we would expect. In Gaulish coins there are representations of the serpent under or over a horse, said to be a symbol of the sun god. In fact, in the Bible we have Jesus, the sun god, riding or on top of the ass or horse, as he rides triumphantly in Jerusalem, to death and to new life, the pattern of the sun each day. However, there is a remarkable scientific reason for this association. In order to produce anti-venom, non-lethal doses are injected into horses, and over a period of time the horse naturally builds up antibodies, specifically designed to neutralize the venom. Eventually, the horse's blood is collected and the antibodies extracted to produce anti-venom. This amazing coincidence is not new. It has been known about for centuries and is as old as oral tradition can be. This idea of the ancient concept of the horse is also seen in the peculiar images of horseshoes seen on rock art in Australia, from before there were even horses in Australia. Getting back now to the concept of the head and its association with the serpent, we find that the Greek god Pan, seen by many scholars as one of the progenitors of the horned god, found in so many places around the world. According to many sources, his father was Hermes, the wielder of the caduceus. Other sources have him as the oldest god of all, older even than Zeus. At Cirencester, England, this horned god is depicted with two snakes rearing up, replacing his legs in a similar fashion to the images of Dagon. In fact, I have travelled the length and breadth of Europe and found these images at hundreds of sites. In Greek legend there is Dionysius, who is equated to the other horned gods as the god of animals and hunting, the same Dionysius who I found elsewhere to hold the chalice or elixir. There is also a female version of the horned god in Amalthea, the goat nymph goddess. She was the glorious nurse of Zeus and Pan. Zeus took one of Amalthea's horns and gave it to the nymphs. It became the Horn of Plenty, a precursor to the Holy Grail. Upon Zeus becoming the Lord of the universe, he set Amalthea's image among the stars as Capricorn, which has a fish or serpent's tail. On frescoes in the Roman catacombs, the ancient pagans drew images of the sea-goat carrying the caduceus, therefore linking the horned god with the healing and wise elements of the serpent. This image alone, as the goat of Mendes, was to move into alchemical and Kabbalistic circles much later on. The Wandering Jew and the horned god, Osiris and Dionysius, all are synonymous now with the infamous Green Man. The Green Man, or indeed woman, can be seen across the world in medieval and even modern cathedrals and churches. Many will now be familiar with the chapel at Roslin and the many hundreds of green men depicted there, peering from their foliage hideaways. However, take a trip to South Westminster or Lichfield Cathedral in England, and you will find many more. In fact, there are thousands of green men and women across Europe. These depictions are ancient and have been distinct pagan origins, and now that we understand our diverse pagan heritage included the worship of the serpent, and the many things that this entails, we must also understand that Christianity adopted it. The Green Man is the fertile god of nature, the god of life, and it is therefore only fitting that he has a consort and a female version of equal status. The fact that there are less female green deities poking out of stone trees from the church wall is simply because Christianity took on the paternal aspects of the Jewish religion. In truth, a rich, fertile and active nature simply had to have a dual nature of male and female, and mirror the life of those on our plane of existence. But what are the origins and meanings behind this peculiar little character? Could it be from the idea in the time of Moses that the area of snakebite turned green? The green man or woman was therefore not necessarily green to the foliage, but may have been due to the idea that he or she was immortal due to the healing venom of the snake. El-Qadir is the Arabic term meaning green, and is said by some to be linked to the infamous Sumerian Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh, in one epic tale, tried to find the herb that brings eternal life, the elixir, but a snake steals it while he is taking a bath. Gilgamesh is also the one who cuts the chalupu tree, which is surrounded by serpents at its base. He takes the tree to Inanna, but keeps the rootstock where the snakes had been, and makes the magic wands Miku and Puku, said to be the progenitors of the serpent rods of Moses and Aaron. El-Qadir is also equated with St. George, the Wandering Jew, Elijah, Moses, the one with the serpent staff, Melchizedek, the longest lived person in the Bible, Dionysius, said to be the Greek green man before he took on the role of wine and ecstasy, and the Druze say that El-Qadir is John the Baptist, which is interesting when we consider that Lady Raglan and Sir James Fraser pointed out that human representations of the year king and queen, or green man and woman, were usually decapitated and then hung on a tree, as John is decapitated and Jesus is hung on a tree. This of course makes John and Jesus two aspects of the same thing. El-Qadir is said to be immortal as he drank or fell into the well of the water of life. He is wise as a serpent, and several Sufi orders claim descent and initiation via him. With connections to Islam, we have to ask, did the Templars have any idea about El-Qadir? Was he the head they were accused of worshipping, known as Baphomet? El-Qadir is also linked by some to Al-Qaed, the Muslim star on the tail of Ursa Minor, behind the head of Draco. The colour green is something seen often in folklore, myth and legend, and strangely it always seems to have some relationship to our tale here. Guinevere, the serpent-connected Queen of Arthur, is said to have green or emerald robes. Sir Gawain is the Green Knight. Wolfram von Eckenbach's Parsifal linked strongly to the Templar tale, as the hermit Trevirisent with a green reliquary. Even the sword used to behead John the Baptist is said to be emerald. Ancient druids, neophytes and the fairies were said to wear green. And as we know, green is a distinctly fertile and vegetative colour across the world. For all these reasons, the secretive and ancient languages and symbols of alchemists, mystics and even Gnostics is said to be the green language. Now, just a quick mention of Roslin. Although the Sinclair who built Roslin was not a Templar, he was linked to the Templars indirectly, and Roslin has hundreds of green men images, as well as Templar symbols, namely two brothers on a horse, the Agnus Dei, the five-pointed star or pentacle, the head of Christ image or Baphomet, as well as the floriated cross and the dove in flight with the olive branch. Split up, and most of these images are purely Christian symbols or motifs, stolen from other more ancient religions. However, put together in one place, with historical links to the Templars, we are left with little doubt that there must be a Templar and esoteric link. But inside Roslin, one is always overcome with the sheer scale of the vegetation. It is simply like bringing the outside in. In fact, that is almost exactly what was happening. The Garden of Eden, where the Tree of Life and the Tree of Knowledge were brought to this place. It was a place of knowledge and eternal life. There is little wonder that the Green Man should be in residence. Also, a few miles from Roslin is Temple, the modern-day name for Ballintroduch, the ancient headquarters of the Templars in Scotland. However, that Roslin Templar diversion out of the way, we have to try and make sense of what we have learned, and I apologise for bombarding you with lots of seemingly unrelated information. We began this tale with the story of the Merovingians. This now infamous royal family has even found its way into the film The Matrix, because of the perception that it has spawned secrets and secret societies around the world, as if protecting something. This whole mythos has in fact become one of the best money spinners in the literary and film worlds. We are fed little bits of information, most of which is an outright scandalous set of lies created to bolster theories that simply do not hold water, and all the time we are forced away from the simple historical truths which underpin the balderdash spoken, the same way that the Templars' true purpose was hidden beneath words such as poverty. There is no relationship between the supposed lineage of Jesus and Mary to shape-shifting reptiles. There is no lineage, except that created in the mind of man. In fact, it would be a far stretch of the historian's imagination to accept that a real Christ existed at all in the form that is constantly rammed down our throats. Jesus, as we can clearly see, was the culmination of a great many pagan deities, and all of them, without exception, are linked in one way or another to the worship of the wise serpent and to the power of the sun. It is therefore no stretch of the imagination to understand that the character of Jesus was in part based upon these serpent deities. Just look at the shedding of the skin, whereby the snake crawls into a dark place and leaves behind its skin, and then emerges born again. The same thing happened to Christ, as he died on the tree, was placed in the tomb, and once risen to new life, left behind his old skin or shroud. In Africa and elsewhere the snake is still pinned to the tree, as a votive offering or sacrifice for the health of the tribe. In some places it is even pierced on the side. Christ was equated to the brazen serpent of Moses, and we are told to be as wise as serpents. In truth, the ancient and pagan worship of the wise serpent has slithered unseen into our so-called modern religions. What there is, in fact, as we can see from the disparate evidence presented above, is a whole host of clues laid bare before our eyes. All we have to do is eradicate the preconceived thoughts that are in our minds. These thoughts were placed there at Sunday school, in textbooks, and from the silver screen, or indeed from the now imposing internet. Try to break a boundary here for me for a moment. Imagine, if you will, a world that holds no mystery. No, this isn't the beginning of a John Lennon song. It is a serious attempt to alter our perspective. Imagine that there are no ghosts, no aliens, no Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. Just imagine that man simply evolved over vast periods of time, and to a point where he suddenly, or slowly, became conscious of the world around him, and his own place in it. It's like looking at a monkey and watching as it looks around, picks up a few things, and then something comes into its mind and it's startled. We can see in its eyes and actions that it is scared to death. It has suddenly realised that it is as sentient and quite separate from the world around him. He looks at the other monkeys now with the austere gaze and pities them. But he's also very different now, and so he takes himself away from nature and begins to use the world around him for products it can supply. Gradually, like a baby, his mind tries to work out how everything is put together and how to take them apart. He wants to know what those points of lights are in the sky, what that big yellow round thing is, and the white one that changes shape at night. He'd never spotted that before, and so he analyses everything. A few thousand years pass by and the descendants of our little monkey are losing their hair because they have covered their bodies in the skin of other animals for the cold and wet times. They are using their minds, working out how to kill bigger and bigger quantities of animals for meat, which they have found gives them more satisfaction than eating vegetables and fruit matter all day long. Now they have more time on their hands, a concept they had no idea of before they became conscious. Time passes slowly, and the mind develops. Some, in the growing groups, want to know more, and as they question, they become fearful of the dark night, the deep waters and the burning summers. Noises come from the woods that they no longer know, because they have been away too long from that level of nature, and so they wish to understand. The new world of the stars, sun, moon, raging waters, reflections, and the death, all must be explained or avoided. For thousands of years these new men experiment with the natural world and discover all kinds of cures and even mind-altering drugs. Then one crippled little monkey man takes some strange-looking mushroom, and in his own mind he disappears into another world, a world that the new consciousness becomes aware of as the unconscious world of the imagination. But these concepts are not yet born, and so this other world is real, very real. And when the monkey man returns, he tells the others of his vision trip. He is so adamant in his belief that others try the process too and experience archetypal visions, and so also believe the process to be real. They see spirals and strange serpentine shapes that modern research has proven to be at the deepest level of our psyche, and so when awake they spot these shapes all around them and see the snake disappear into the other world and emerge with new life. It is a special animal, more special than all the others. Years pass, and we now see large wooden buildings, circles of trees and pathways, all mirroring these other worlds. Pictures are painted on these structures and inside caves of the wonderful otherworldly visions. Men and women have been chosen to access these worlds for the rest of the growing tribe, and they become healers and guides, medicine men and priests. All around they paint and carve images of snakes, and folklore erupts with tales of their ways. These new priests take a name, serpent priests and shining ones, and very soon they are even forming their own child's head into elongated shapes of the snake. This is not fanciful imagination. This is not aliens or beings from other dimensions. This is hard archaeological and historical fact. The evidence is there. We zoom forward now to the 21st century, and what do we find? Modern myths of saviours and Christmen who can access other worlds, tales of green men and immortal shaman-like semi-deities, and now stone buildings with beautiful depictions of myths that stretch back in time to our ancient monkey man, who sat one day and almost fell off his perch when he realised what the hell he was. We also see another myth forming. These Merovingians are said to be a dynasty of Frankish priest-kings with magical powers. Now cast your mind back to the dark age of humanity and the emerging medieval period. The folk of Europe blindly follow a myth created in the Holy Land by some wise monkeys called Gnostics. A tale of a man who was the son of a god. It is all taken so literally, so simply, but life is hard, and death and pain are everywhere, and an idea of a crusade comes forth to go and save souls in the Holy Land. In battle and death, suffering men can find atonement for their sins and a glorious life in heaven. And so in their thousands they depart and battle the might of Islam. They take the holy city of Jerusalem. But along the way, men with minds meet and communicate with holy men from other faiths. Such conversations were impossible in Europe. New influences are now at play. New concepts that there is more to the spiritual life than just the simple literal Christianity. In fact, these men of thought soon discover that their own religion is in fact based upon much older myths of serpent worship and immortality through the power of the sun and snake. A concept so wholly encompassed in the idea of the Holy Grail. The cup that holds the blood of the one true great serpent god himself. The cup that is the mind of the illuminated. Imagine then, also, the fact that these newfound truths were pure heresy in a world dominated by the power of a vicious Catholic Church who jealously guards its literalisms of the Gnostic texts. Nobody would dare to openly speak of such truths in a world of utter and complete control by the ruling elite. And so the truths are hidden, coded and kept secret. New groups are formed that protect these secrets and pass them on through time. This stream of information from one generation to another became symbolised in the bloodline. The truth of the Holy Grail passed down from one age to another through the long line of initiates via the sacred bloodline of secrets. This is the truth, that all of the secrets were in fact hidden in plain sight, and the key to understanding them was protected throughout the dark period of Catholic control. The Templars did discover the Grail, or truth, and they did pass on its knowledge. In this way, what they did was heresy, and that had to be stamped out. So many stories came so close, and yet were so far away.